Hello, everyone, and welcome to Real Talk Office Hours Hunting for Silver Linings for this Wednesday, July 29, 2020, hosted today by myself, Corey Hart. We have George Katsanos. We're both in West Michigan in the United States, and we have a very special guest joining us, Pablo from Monterrey in Mexico. We're brought to you overall by Startup Grind, the world's largest startup community. We operate with 600 plus chapters in over 125 countries, and we have a mission to educate, inspire, and connect. We're driven by three values. That's make friends, not contacts, help others before you help yourself, and give before you take. Now, this pandemic, it has been and will continue to be the great global leveler. And as entrepreneurs, we need to do our very best for our businesses, our teams, and our families. And we need to do so by being informed, rational, analytical, and rigorous in our thinking. We should also learn to control our biases as they emerge in various circumstances. We invite everyone to join us live every Monday, Wednesday, Friday as we track the intersection of facts, biases, and action through our review of global financial markets, alongside check-ins and real talk with Startup Grind chapter directors, entrepreneurs, ecosystem stakeholders from around the world. And we do this because no one has a crystal ball, but if we keep our eyes and ears open and we pay very close attention, we may be able to see around the bend. And with some luck, spot the silver linings that are around every cloud. And if you miss the live events, you can always catch the recordings at startupgrind.com/grand-rapids. And before I introduce George for the global market update, just a little bit of housekeeping. Comments made and views expressed by all participants in this podcast are not intended to invite or incite individuals, entrepreneurs, or investors to buy, sell financial assets, real assets, commodities, futures, and or options. The purpose of this podcast is to educate and to inform, not to trade or to invest. If you feel compelled to trade and or invest, please call your broker. And remember, however, risk is everywhere, even when you think that you're not taking a risk. And with all that, it is now my pleasure to introduce to you, George Katsanos, to get us started with what the global markets have been thinking.
Thank you, Corey. Hello to everyone, both on this side of the border and globally. As Corey said, this is not the time to be careless. If you really want to trade in this kind of market, please see a psychoanalyst. Do not listen to this podcast. The environment is becoming dramatic. Today at 2 o'clock East Coast time here in the US, the Federal Reserve will make an announcement about its policy stance. And to that effect, the markets are going nowhere, the equities markets here in the US. But let's start with the way things are on the currency front. The reason we start the real talk by looking into different asset classes, different kinds of investments, is because we have always held the view that in a politicized environment, the news tends to be biased. As my good friend Corey mentioned some time ago, if you read the press, you're misinformed. If you don't read the press, you are uninformed. So we turn to the capital markets because the nuggets of information each one of these sectors of the capital markets give us may prevent entrepreneurs and investors from doing the unthinkable, i.e. losing principal. Our objective is to protect entrepreneurship, to support innovation, and to grow our communities. The dollar has traded almost 117 and almost 118 recently. Remember, it was not so long ago, maybe 10 days ago, that he was trading with 111 or 12 in front of it. So this significant change is the result of the monetization of US domestic economy. As the stimulus package is being unveiled, we have the Democrats sitting on a $3 trillion proposal and the Republicans a $1 trillion proposal. So whichever you cut it, it is going to be a lot of money coming into the market. And surprise, surprise, the equity market is still waiting to digest it. It seems that the currency market has taken the view that the dollar is going to remain weak. And Goldman Sachs, believe it or not, issued another report saying that the status of dollar as a reserve currency is in danger. Well, we know that Goldman Sachs has a strategy, a tradition of trading its book. So don't be afraid if they're sitting on both sides of this argument, a weaker dollar and a stronger dollar. From our view, however, it is very clear. The risk trade is on. Investors are taking a breather from the gloom and doom of the early stages of the pandemic. And as the global economy has opened up partially, investors took the view that it is a good time to invest. We also had the European Union leadership coming together and deciding how to proceed with a 750 billion euro structural fund to support the European economy. Net, what we have is a beggar than able policy. Essentially, the currencies are fighting for depreciation across the board. And at the moment, it seems that the dollar is taking the hit. However, we wouldn't be surprised if over the next 6 months or so, the dollar becomes stronger. But that is our personal view. And as we said, past performance is not a good indication for the future. So do not listen to our views. Just keep on looking at the data. The bond market, however, which is our preferred indicator of what is really going on, is telling us that bonds have not moved a single dot. In other words, from all around the world, when we look at the 10-year bonds, the markets are stable, which means what? The markets are afraid, the bond markets, the bond investors are afraid that this euphoria around us is not going to last for very long. That's why the 10-year Indian bond is trading at 5.8, South Korea at 1.3, Japan at 0, Australia 0.87, New Zealand 0.8. No changes here, none, nothing to write about. Why? Investors prefer the safety of government bonds. In Europe, well, what can I say? Just look at the market. 10-year bonds in Italy have a 1% coupon now, the yield to maturity. Can you imagine? The structurally weakest European economy is paying 1% instead of 10% or 8%, the old BTPs a couple of years ago. Well, to make the matters more interesting, what we're seeing is that Germany is stuck at minus 0.5 and Switzerland at minus 0.6%. So the European markets are also suggesting caution. They're also suggesting that no matter what the equity folks are doing, we want to be conservative and cautious. Look at the US, 10 years under 0.6, Canada almost 0.5, Brazil 6.7, and Mexico 5.7%. These are healthy yields in the sense that the market is well bid. The market is not afraid of investing in 10-year instruments. Why? Growth is anemic. Inflation is nowhere to be found. Let's look at our commodities. The commodity picture is absolutely interesting in its own right. West Texas Intermediate, 41.3, and one of the highest levels of the last several months. Brent, 43.7, natural gas, 1.8. The heating complex, the energy complex, is telling us that the world demand seems to be picking up. It seems that the supply considerations and concerns have been put on the side. Let's see what happens as we go towards the winter, once the summer driving season ends. Gold, almost 2,000. Two reasons: fear of debasement of the currencies and fear of inflation. This is why the gold bugs are buying gold. Whichever way you cut it, we are at the peak of a cycle. Over the last 9 years, 10 years, this is the largest, the highest increase in the price of gold. And what we always say is that when all asset classes are moving in one direction, it's time for contrarian thinkers to be thinking contrarian. But we'll come to this in a moment. On the agricultural front, we see that every single time our grains are going or making an effort to go up, the shorts are coming back in. Why? Nothing is happening with China, nothing measurable. The size of the crop this year is going to be sizable across grains, and I mean corn, soybeans, and wheat. And the reason is that in the Northern Hemisphere, here in the US, we've had fantastic weather, perfect humidity. The temperatures have been benign. We have not had any scorching weather. So the crop is going to be healthy and large, which means that if the supply chain maintains its robustness, we shouldn't have any issues feeding the planet. Let's look at what is going on the equity front. The world markets are a little bit mixed. We've seen Asia at the bottom of the table. Korea 0.3% up, Taiwan marginally down, Hang Seng half a percent up. China, the A50 series and Shenzhen up significantly, 1.6 and 3% respectively. China, the Chinese government is pulling the stops. They're flooding the economy. They're doing their best to support the growth there. Guess why? The only reason the Chinese government is doing it because they're afraid of unemployment. We know that the data suggests there's 15,000 demonstrations every year across China for various kinds of topics. If the economy doesn't grow, if these young individuals don't find jobs, there's going to be social unrest. And the pact on which the supremacy of the Communist Party is based will be challenged. So China is growing, is trying to grow and support growth in the area. Geopolitically, it's a different story. We'll see how this game rolls out. When we look at Europe, on the other hand, the picture tends to be slightly mixed. And what we mean by that is um, Budapest is down 0.4%. The Tel Aviv 35 is up 0.2%. Milan is down 0.5%. Portugal is up 0.2%. And the CAC, the French index, is up 0.8%. DAX, on the other hand, is marginally low. What does that say? Well, everyone is waiting for the outcome of today's press conference of the Federal Reserve. What we have seen is consistently, this Federal Reserve has made significant and, in our view, correct decisions in supporting the robustness of the US economy, but also providing liquidity in a dollar-short world. We mentioned that at the beginning of our series, that the world, the planet was short dollars. So the Federal Reserve provided ample liquidity through printing the press, but also through credit lines. I think it will be interesting to see and to listen to what the Federal Reserve expects the stop-go character of the economy to lead to. In other words, Corey and I, in our discussions, both privately but also in real talk, have always considered that the stop-go character is going to create uneven growth at best. We are seeing the efforts to open up the economy. They're being met with the resurgence of COVID-19. We've always suggested that primary consideration is that of health for all of us, and our view has not changed. Now, having said that, as you can see in the background, the leadership of Silicon Valley, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Netflix, and so on and so forth, are being questioned, and Facebook are being questioned today in Congress about monopoly power. It is fascinating that these upstarts 20 years ago were not even taken seriously. The pandemic has given these companies tremendous leverage, tremendous opportunity to unify us and bring us together. I think it will also be very interesting to hear some of the considerations as we're going forward regarding the Republican package of support for the local economy. That's it for today. Back to you, Corey.
Thank you very much, George. There's definitely a lot going on. Even last week we were faced with a lot of global uncertainty. Less of that this week as we move forward and getting promising news from the various central banks and different actions across the globe, and we'll see what the U.S. does. Today, I'm really excited to be welcoming Pablo from Monterrey, Mexico, chapter director for Startup Grind down there. And he also heads up the Latin American delegation of directors, which is really great. This is going to be an interesting conversation because we had one of our earlier conversations with Vancouver. We expect to talk to like Toronto in a little while. When we speak with ecosystems that are almost what we could call neighbors to the U.S., it's interesting to see like how closely or not so closely, or where they do diverge as far as partnering. For example, Monterrey is just a couple hours drive from Texas. Is that correct? Yeah, Pablo, good to see you.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you very much for hosting me. Yeah, exactly. Monterrey, it's like maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours from the border in Texas. And these days I travel between Mexico City and Monterrey and Guadalajara, which are the largest cities in Mexico. And we have been seeing like a lot of things going on for the last couple of years in terms of closer collaboration with the US, especially in Guadalajara. Now we're seeing like Intel innovation offices, Oracle offices. So it's looking promising.
Yeah, that's it's exciting stuff to see, especially so fast and such what we'd consider a short amount of time. But before we get into more of that stuff, I'm excited to hear a bit about your personal background. Maybe even start with your like origination story, like superheroes. Like how did you become attracted to this life of entrepreneurship and mentorship?
Okay. I was never really a good student. So eventually, I tried to find a job and nobody wants to hire me. So I tried to understand the people that owned companies, and I didn't thought at the moment that they were super smart or super brilliant. So I think, okay, maybe if nobody is offering me a job, I can create my own company and create my own job. So that was a long time ago. From that time to date, I have founded 7 companies, sold 4 of them. And in 2012, I started wondering if there were more people in Mexico that were creating tech companies. And there were a lot of events at that time in Mexico City for networking and this like Hackers and Founders, which provides like beer and people go to network and everything. But I didn't want to network that much. I was actually looking for a community in which you can talk to another founders and try to figure out how to take decisions regarding startups like getting funded, recruiting, tech teams and everything. So I started talking to the few amount of people that I knew inside the tech world. And I met an investor, which was from the US, but was creating a venture capital firm in Monterrey. And sorry, and eventually he was like, okay, you have this idea. I'm going to introduce you to another person which have the same very idea. And that's how I met Derek, which is Startup Grind founder. And it was very funny because I pitched my idea in terms of creating a community and getting founders together and try to get them to get help from each other and everything. And he let me like speak for maybe, I don't know, 15 minutes. And at the end, he was like, okay, it sounds super good. We are already doing that. And I'm like, oh, okay. So that's how I got my first contact with Startup Grind.
Very good. And since then, you've just really flourished within the community and helped it grow, exponentially. When I was at the global conference in February, I had the opportunity to hear you talk about some of the smaller forums that you hold on behalf of founders of companies as well as investors, and providing some significant direct access to the decision makers. Can you talk a little bit about these forums that you've developed?
Yeah, in 2016, in Mexico, we were going through an ecosystem like development that just explode. And by explode, I mean we got like the government pouring money to entrepreneurs, but also big universities. And they were super excited about early stage in entrepreneurship. And we at Startup Grind, we're like a very, very big community, but that doesn't mean that we have like a lot of money or a lot of infrastructure around it. So our efforts from one day to another just became very small because we didn't have the bandwidth that the universities or the country have. And we questioned ourselves if it was the best idea to keep working in early stages. So what we did at that moment was moving to late stages because we figured out 2 things. The first one was that big companies, big startups need help, even more help than the small ones, because if you have a really, really small startup and it dies, it's really not a big problem other than the founders. Like, it's fine. But if you have a company with 100 employees and that go down, it's pretty hard, for a lot of people, a lot of families. And then we understood that as Startup Grind, as myself, we had a lot of contacts and good friends in the US, especially for venture capital firms inside San Francisco or the Bay Area. And we thought if we can make that matches at the moment, that would mean the world for a lot of startups. So we created this small gathering, which is called For Founders, and we handpicked the top 20 founders of the region and then the top 10 investors from the region. And the idea was to get them in touch with these big Silicon Valley firms like Sequoia, Accel, Clayton Perkins, like top tier VCs, not for them to maybe invest immediately, but for them to get the point of the startups and then try to figure out how they were growing or moving forward. That was 2017. Since then, we have been working with several firms. The first time that TechCrunch came to Mexico was through us, London Stock Exchange, Excel, Clayton Perkins, and the first time that many companies were interested in startups was because we were like talking to them from the US and then trying to get them interested in Latin America. So now what we are trying to do is trying to figure out how to get these companies bigger or more international. And to give you like a good example of the region, when we did the first edition of our founders in 2017, the biggest round of funding for a Latin American company, with the except of Brazil, which we see as another region, was $35 million. That was like the biggest investment round for Latin America. Last year, the biggest investment round for a Latin American company was for Rappi, delivery company started in Colombia, which was $1 billion. So it,
big difference.
You know, like now, like $1 billion, like for any part of the world, that's a huge, huge round. Like I was joking with a couple of friends, and I was like, I cannot imagine receiving $1 billion for a company based in Latin America. Like you can buy some, like a couple of countries or cities, or like it's crazy, you know. Like even if the small cities in the US, like can you imagine deploying $1 billion?
Right.
Like you can spend like $70 million and you still have most of the money. You know, like you can go buy offices, open offices in 5 cities, like do a lot of things, and that might cost you $20 million. Then you have $980 million still. So, so it has been like a great, great journey in terms of seeing how the ecosystem is growing.
That's a powerful testament to the effectiveness of building strong communities, and then those international partnerships and telling really great stories. You mentioned the government earlier and their participation on the smaller early stages, and I want to ask a little bit, maybe move to the Monterrey ecosystem. Now, it's a top ecosystem in Mexico, you know, top 3, right? And in the globe, you're easily in the top 100 as far as ecosystems for innovation and entrepreneurship. As far as I understand, like you're very strong in aerospace, defense, you know, automotive. But what are some of the other sectors that you're known for?
I will tell you, like, first, just to give you a little perspective, one thing that I think is pretty interesting in Mexico, it's that the cities are not that strong as the country. Like, if you're in a Monterrey-based entrepreneurship or entrepreneur, or you have a startup, it feels a lot natural to feel like you're a Mexican-based startup. Like, you don't have like a lot of sense of belonging regarding the city. It's much more about the country. So most of the companies start in a city in Mexico, maybe 6 months after that have offices in Mexico City. That's why now I am spending most of the time in Mexico City. So Monterrey, it's pretty well known around the world because they have a very good manufacturing skills. So like the top or the biggest cement company in the world is from Mexico, and it's based in Monterrey. The biggest Coca-Cola bottler other than Coca-Cola company, it's based in Monterrey. You know, the second biggest beer company, which was acquired by the Heineken Group, now it's based in Monterrey. So there's like this, maybe from the top 10 companies in Latin America, maybe 3 of them are from Monterrey. So they have like a huge entrepreneurship spirit. And these days, like most of the people is trying to provide entrepreneurship around manufacturing of things. But one thing that I think Monterrey is starting to get like really excited about it is it's fintech, because they have manufacture and they have like all these companies, but financial services are something in Mexico that hasn't been developed for companies. So especially if you're not that large, which can access to, I don't know, Morgan Stanley and some banks in the US, if you're like a medium company and you need like credits or financing or anything, it's really hard to get some sophisticated products other than regular products at banks.
Yeah, we're going to get into that aspect, the banking. section in just a little bit. Before I move on, George, you have something to ask?
Yes, I mean, it is interesting to see how the ecosystem has evolved. Um, from your description, Pablo, what were the drivers of this, so to speak, inward investment into Latin America? Was it innovation? Was it the digitalization being accelerated? What were the drivers?
I think the biggest driver for me is the understanding of the market. Like, and we had like a regional conference a couple of weeks ago, and that was like the main theme of the conference, which was like Latin America, is it a market or not? Like, because if you see like the economic value of the market in terms of comparing the US with Latin America, the value is almost the same, but it's not the same to go for the US market, which is, it looks a lot like it. Like it's very similar if you go to from state to state and everything. But if you go to Latin America, you're dealing with different countries and a bigger geographical area. So I think when we see what happened in entrepreneurship, we had like 2 or 3 companies that were super successful after the .com issue. So it was Mercado Libre, which is a company started in Argentina and trading in NASDAQ for many, many years. That company is doing great. One thing that they did very early was going regional. They went regional super fast. Maybe within 2 years, they were operating in 5 to 10 countries, which is crazy. And then we have this other company called Despegar, which is very similar to Expedia, also is a public traded company. And I think what they did pretty good is they are expert in the regional market. So they are not expert in some way in their own field. They're experts in the market. So I think there are 2 main types of companies in the world and in the region is one, if you're super sophisticated in what you do, you can move that around the world. So we can think about Stripe. Like Stripe started in Europe, in Ireland, moved to the US, and now it's operating in many, many countries because their sophistication lives inside the payment development area. But if you see companies like Mercado Libre and Despegar, they are in the other way. They are experts in the Latin American market. So what it's different is that they start creating new products from the same market. So even though Mercado Libre is a very, very big company, they never went out of Latin America, but they keep improving and innovating with new products for the market. So I think that's why, that's one of the reasons. And the other reason for the growth in the ecosystem is that like companies or startups in the region are starting to understand that. So many companies are staying in their countries before moving too fast to grow, and other companies are designed to grow to other countries from the beginning. So like Rappi, which is this huge company invested by Andreessen Horowitz, among many other investors, they started in Colombia, which have like a very, very small internal markets compared to Brazil, Mexico, the US, or many countries. But what they did is trying to create the market fit in Colombia and try to understand the needs versus an Uber Eats or other delivery services. And then when they nailed the solution, they moved to another, like 5 more countries, and then they went to the US for US investment, and then they grew super fast. So I think the regionality of the markets, most of the startups are starting to figure that out.
Thank you. That is actually quite impressive, because we heard a similar argument in a different context, of course, from Georgi in Bulgaria, in Plovdiv. The near overseas, instead of going to Asia for innovation, it is coming closer. I assume you have indigenous software developers, you have universities, you have an ecosystem that is taking care of innovation in products, people, and processes.
Yeah, exactly. Like, for example, it was fun, but it was like, it's funny, but one of the biggest issues we had, like, for instance, in Monterrey towards developing our ecosystem was that we have this university in Mexico called Tech of Monterrey, which is one of the biggest, largest universities in the world. They have like around 100,000 alumni because they have 32 campuses in Mexico or something like that. And so they were really big. And one of their strongest careers are engineering. And the problem we had is that most of the US top tier tech companies, Oracle, Facebook, Amazon, Monterrey students from Tech of Monterrey was like their favorite engineers in the region. So if you can imagine competing for engineers with Facebook, you're like pretty much done because you're paying in pesos based on the Mexican market, and then Facebook comes and they want to recruit like 200 engineers. So they were getting like first pick. So in terms of talent, that was a real issue for Monterrey specifically, because also most of the engineers were, if not moving to the US and working for a US company, they were working remotely with US fees like $100, $200, $300 an hour. And in Mexico, an engineer with good levels would be around maybe $5,000 a month would be a pretty good salary for an engineer in Mexico. So around $60,000 a year, which for that would be like a senior engineer. In the US, especially if you go to the Bay Area or something, like that's nothing.
Yeah, that's a very real thing. We're going to talk a bit more about talent in a little bit, and we have somebody on the call right now. We have Laddie. He's very experienced in the technical recruiting aspect. And one of the startups that I was working with just a few months ago, we developed our dev team specifically with engineers across the globe and leveraging the US dollar to get the best talent. Like we had developers in Argentina, and then we had others in Ukraine, and our friend over in Bulgaria, we had some engineers there as well, so we could work around the clock. Now, I was one thing that we really like doing here is breaking down stereotypes about ecosystems, and I was really pleased to learn a few minutes ago that when you told me that it's not so much of a city by city or state by state mindset that the entrepreneurs have in Mexico, but it's a Mexico, like we're a Mexican startup, like we're not a Monterrey startup. So
yeah, exactly.
So we like to ask how people can get their ideas into market from like 0 to 1. And you have the National Institute of Entrepreneurship. You have a large network of university campuses, like you just mentioned. We have headquarters in all throughout Mexico, probably with their own innovation labs or whatever. So if I have an idea, if I'm somewhere in Mexico, deep south, close to the border of the US. Where do I go if I have an idea? Do I go into an incubator? Do I go to an accelerator? How do I find my co-founders? Like what's my journey to get to that 0 to 1?
I think especially me and the team, we have like a very particular way of seeing that. So, maybe this might be a little bit aggressive for a lot of people, but it's like, okay, we like to think, or I like to think you need to survive that by yourself. Because if you get help very early, like, is this kind of thing in which we can give you like some oxygen, but you're gonna fail as soon as we remove the oxygen. So I think that in the first stage, like the points that you just comment, like trying to get a co-founder and trying to get your idea into implementation, I think that's something that you should figure it out yourself. And most of the companies that we help, we ask for them to be at least 6 months in operation.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the easier way of getting your idea in the ground is trying to forget a little bit about lean startup and try a little bit more focusing. I love this theory, which is called from Clay Christensen. And I think the good thing about Job to be Done, which is the name of the theory, is that it absolutely changes the approach on how to start your entrepreneurship endeavor and try to figure it out on how good the solution that you're proposing to the market it is, and if it's really something that the people would be interested in. So it's similar to the product validation in startup, but it's much more focused on actually understanding who is resolving that issue or improving that situation, and then trying to put a price on it. So I think trying to get like a lot of definition in the project is something you can do by yourself. Like, what are you doing? How will you make it happen? Like trying to get all these things on paper will force you to become like a little bit more sophisticated in terms of starting the idea. Then when you're like really putting the efforts towards starting and you start, that's the moment you can get like in touch with communities like Startup Grind, Startup Weekend, and that would be the first like point of entry. But I don't think you should even go to a lot of events if you are not like certain about what you want to do in terms of your startup.
Well, that's helpful. That definitely sounds like a very mature ecosystem mentality. Now, so I have my idea. I've got it off the ground. Everything's written down. I have my first customers. I have some traction. I've got my team. They're really solid. Now I'm looking for some money. Is this friends and family first? Are there plenty of angel groups? And you had said earlier, since it is a national mindset, I'm probably not stuck in my geographic area, right? So I can seek throughout the country or outside of the country. Is that easy as well? So yeah, where does the money come from now that I have my idea and team?
I think we have matured a lot in the last maybe 5 years in terms of access to capital. So now we have around 40 venture capital firms in Mexico, but also most of the funds in Argentina are investing in Mexico, and most of the funds in Mexico are investing in Colombia and Argentina. So the regionality is starting to become an easy way. So for instance, we have a 500 startups office here in Mexico City, and they have around 60% of the startups that they choose are from other countries. So I think we are developing a good ecosystem in terms of, we have like 2 really good accelerators, which are 500 startups. And then we have Mass Challenge, which is an accelerator coming from Massachusetts in Boston. And then we have like a lot of smaller niche accelerators like Bootcamp, which is a fintech accelerator, and a couple of more like focus on a very specific area. So I think the first thing would be to try to approach those accelerators. And most of like, if you're raising a small amount, let's think about $25,000, which gives you like a year of oxygen in the region, would be kind of easy to try to go to another startup's founders. And that wouldn't be that hard. Like most of the new startups are getting funded by 4 or 5 founders, and they go for 5,000 or something. So that would be like the first stage. And the second stage would be like trying to move to a $100,000 investment, 150. Then you can go to some angels. We have like in Mexico, I would calculate that we have maybe like not that much, like 100 angels, 150 angel investors. And that would provide most of the money. Friends and family usually do it, but more in an informal way. So usually the equity remains on the founder, and then when somebody comes, like an institutional investor, like a VC or an angel, they would ask for the conditions to have like the equity and the cap tables and everything.
Great. That's and George, do you have any questions about the cash and where that flows through and from? I think you're still on mute.
I'm listening this presentation that Pablo is making, and I have to tell you, I'm really impressed because it reminds me very much of what Henry Xu was telling us about Vancouver. And it seems, Pablo, that you have created a network very similar to what we've seen in Silicon Valley, whereby you have the academic expertise, you have the hardware expertise, you have the systems expertise, and you don't need capital because capital will flow. Essentially, once you have bootstrapped, once you have survived the critical stages of defining who you are, then capital is not a question, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think that we have two, like the good thing and the bad thing. The good thing is slowly but steady, we are like the money is coming. Like we just had last year the first investment from Sequoia in a Mexican-based company, which now that's another thing. But it's like these days it's very hard to know where the company is because they have like an entity in the U.S. They operate from Mexico, and the founders are from Switzerland. So it's like I don't know. But the bad thing that we still had in Latin America, I think, as an ecosystem, is that we still have all the players thinking they are the main player in the ecosystem. So today we still have like universities thinking they are like the center of the ecosystem. BTs, or a lot of them, think they are the center of the ecosystem. So we are still in the process of removing that barrier, like in the Bay Area, in which you can go and speak to anyone and they will be really interested in what you're doing, and they won't be like patronizing about like, hey, it's okay, but you need more like things around it. Like, I think that's the next step for us. And the other big switch that we had is most of the ecosystem, what they are starting, especially not in big cities, they try to replicate things from other countries, Mexico or other countries, right? So Mercado Libre was the eBay for Latin America, Despegar was the Expedia for Latin America, and we had like a lot of entrepreneurships like that. That is not a bad thing, but it's just the early stages of an ecosystem. But afterwards, what it comes, and that's the stage we are today, it's new entrepreneurs think of new things that are not based on any other idea. So for instance, a couple of weeks ago that we have the regional conference, we have a lot of people speaking, and one of the people that was speaking at the conference, it's Carla, which is a scientist from Chile that is developing new innovation and technology for NASA. So she from Chile is creating.
We have heard about it. Yeah, you're right. Yep.
So she's creating new technology from Chile, from her lab in Chile to NASA. So I think that's the next step, trying to create like a regional, to say it somehow, startups from Latin America. And then we can start seeing like Nubank, which is this new banking startup from Brazil. They were super early in the Nubank game, and now they're one of the top 3 players in the world. So I think that would be a nice switch to have. And I think that's why now, like, especially with SoftBank coming to the region, which was the lead investor in Rappi in the $1 billion investment round, I think the good thing about SoftBank is that they are writing huge checks. The bad thing is that they are ruining valuations a little bit in terms of, you know, like, we have our own valuation market in Latin America, but now SoftBank comes and say, no, it's okay, I will pay you Silicon Valley valuations, it's fine. And all the other funds are kind of left out, right? Because they were not planned financially to support Silicon Valley valuation. So everything has like the good and the bad thing about it.
Yeah, the first thing that came to mind when you brought up that $1 billion investment to me was like, oh my gosh, what does that do to the valuation of everybody else? You know, like why do they need $1 billion down there? So I do want to talk a little bit about some talent, and then we can wrap this up a little bit shortly. So with the talent, on Monday we spoke to Paul over in Cameroon, and for that ecosystem, huge gap. So you have all these people graduating university and just do not have the skills necessary for the work that's being demanded of them in the current market. But you had mentioned that your university system feels like they're the center of the ecosystem. So it sounds like they're providing some adequate training, and then there's the robust network of the incubators, and there's the network of just industry churning out hot talent, right? People graduating from, say, their first, second, third jobs. So can you talk a little bit about the talent, and because it is a national mindset, are people moving around geographically to be close to their jobs, or can it be done remotely? Is there infrastructure issues with that and talent?
So the first thing of our biggest asset in the Mexican ecosystem, I think our biggest engine, is that we have very good engineers. Not necessarily because they are super ready to I don't know, to do and go React and go to the newest like languages in terms of developing or programming, but they are very well prepared to learn new things in the engineering. And I think in any other careers like business or MBAs, they are totally lost, like in most of the world. But if you go to engineers, they have like a pretty good level, even compared to the US universities, to learn and to develop. So I think that's a great asset, and it has been a good thing for Mexico to have that. Like, we have two things happening that are super interesting in terms of mobility. Guadalajara was discovered like maybe 4 or 5 years ago to be a very good place to hire engineers. So that's why, as I told you, Intel opened an innovation space, Oracle have a developing like space. But two things happened there. The first one was the incentive was recruiting very good senior engineers that doesn't cost as much as the US senior engineers. But the second thing that this Intel and Oracle found out that was a super good idea was prospecting US engineers and moving them to Mexico with a standard salary from the US. But if you come to Mexico with the standard salary from the US, like for instance, I was speaking with one of the top engineers in Intel a couple of years ago, and he was living in California. So he was paying rent in California and living with the income he had in California. And then he moved to Mexico City. He had 2 kids and his wife. And he was like, in California, I have an apartment, 2-bedroom apartment, very small, only space for 1 car, and that was about it. Then he moved to Guadalajara to lead the innovation process in Guadalajara in Intel. And he had a 7-bedroom house with a pool, with 3 people as an staff full-time, and 3 cars and 1 driver. And that was cheaper than what he had in the US. So the quality of life was like improved like in a huge way, and he still had access to top tier schools for the children. So it was super. So now Intel and Oracle are moving a lot of people as a good improve or as a good value proposition to their employees. So what that provokes in Guadalajara was these senior people, as they retired, they partnered with good young engineers, and they started a lot of new startups. So cool. That was also a really, really great effort, because for me, at the time that I have been in startup grind, I think the best way to found a startup is getting exactly that, like an engineer that is retired from a tech company and partnered with younger engineers, because the oldest have money and have a lot of connections, and the young engineers have like a new talent in new languages, new ideas. And then it's like super great combination for new startups.
To that end, is it fairly easy to find advisors for your startups because there are a lot of mature people in the market?
In Guadalajara, it is. If you're into tech, if you are in Monterrey, it might be easier to get like people that understand big corporations. Like getting people, if you're doing B2B, you'll have like access to a lot of mentors or help, because most of the people in Monterrey, if they're successful, it's because they have been working a lot of time in this kind of like international corporations and everything. So if you're in Mexico City, I think the easiest kind of help you can get is in a mid-sized startup. If you want to get help, there's a lot of help in terms of recruiting, talent, but it would be like more focused on people that are previous Series B.
Great. One of the last things I want to talk about before we ask you that the big question about, what I warned you about is, or the 2 big questions we warned you about. You had mentioned that Latin America, as far as investment, is investing in different countries. Mexico's investing outside of Mexico. Other countries are investing in Mexico. What is the landscape? And maybe you can also point to some special opportunities for like the safety of me coming down there and being an investor. Are there countries in Latin America that I'm going to want to avoid, or is that just not an issue for my capital? I feel safe investing in companies without Mexico.
Okay, there are two parts of the answer. The first one is actually there's a good amount of companies, or more than companies, founders, people moving to Mexico from the US to start their company here, because you can operate seamless in the US from a Mexican-based company. Like for instance, all of the companies that go through 500 startups have to create a US entity, but they operate from Mexico, because they do like an entity in the US and then they create like an affiliate company in Mexico that depends on that entity. So the logistics are super easy. And you got like a bigger runway, like a much bigger runway here in Mexico for the investment. The second thing that you ask is like, one thing about Mexico that I think is pretty good is that your investments are significantly smaller if you're going to invest in startups, and could now to date grow to the same level of a lot of places in the US, maybe not Silicon Valley or New York, but if you're investing in other parts of the US, like we have a lot of people based in Texas, like angel investors from Texas, looking forward and evaluating more an investment in Mexico, because they can do $30,000, $50,000 and got, 15% from an early stage startup, versus a US company that you have to go maybe to $75,000 to $100,000 to get 10%. Mm-hmm. So it's a bigger opportunity. One country that is pretty complicated, I think, in terms of investment is Brazil. Regulation in Brazil is really complicated, changes all the time. But I think Mexico, Colombia are really great opportunities in terms of investment, and they provide like a decent legal scenario for outside investors. And other than that, I think most of the investors doing investments in Mexico just ask for a US entity as part of the deal, and most of the Mexican startups go for it.
What about Argentina?
Argentina, it's the best opportunity because they have like a lot of financial crisis constantly. So they are super good. And the big thing about Argentinian entrepreneurs are pretty good in terms of education. Like a lot of them went to Stanford, like top tier US universities. The thing is that in Argentina, and that might work for some investors, is you either go huge or you'll die pretty fast. Mm-hmm. So you will not have, like as an angel, I think you are not the same as a VC. You most of the time are not looking for going public and being huge. Even for an early stage investor, it's better to have an exit in 5 years, even though it might not be super big. And in Argentina, it's more about like being like a VC. Either you go huge or you're gonna lose. So most of the angels investors don't like Argentina that much because of that. So if you go through it,
sorry.
If you go as an angel investor in Argentina, if the company goes huge, also you're gonna get diluted pretty bad. Like you will not be, if you imagine Mercado Libre, it's like, okay, maybe even in the Series A, about $150 million, you're gonna get super tiny. And then if the company goes public, you'll be holding, I don't know, less than 0.01%.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. Great, so I think we have maybe the two last questions for you, George.
Okay, I'll ask the first one. And Pablo, thank you really for going into detail, because you're highlighting topics that Corey and I have been discussing for some time, and we will explain to you what we mean later on. But to start with, we have seen around the world that it takes a village to raise a child. In our little world of the startup grind, the child is the entrepreneurship, is the innovation, is the company. In this village, we have women who play a big role. We've seen women all around the globe, especially during this crisis, being major players. What is happening with equity, with social participation in your world?
I think you're still on mute there.
Okay. Regarding women, we have there's this huge company in Mexico called Softec, which is one of the biggest nearshore developing companies in the world. And Blanca, which is the CEO, it's one of the biggest allies in our community. So that has been great. But the other stuff that we are doing in that matter is that a couple of years ago, in 2019, we hosted a regional conference, and we had the goal of creating the first tech startups conference in the world that had a bigger amount of female speakers. And I can tell you that when we were looking for 20 speakers, women founders, we found them in maybe 2 or 3 days. It was super easy. And the challenge is that even in the region, but I think in the world, one of the biggest challenges is most of the female founders decide with the male founder that the male founder should be the CEO. And that's something that we're trying to understand and works on it, because it's not that the man is convincing the woman that he should be the CEO. It's something that they decide. But I'm very happy that maybe of the top 20 startups in Latin America, maybe 8 of them have female founders from that, from the entrepreneurship area. And from the investment area, from the top 10 funds in Mexico, 5 of them have female partners. So I think that's something that it's moving pretty good. There's this fund called General Atlantic, which is a big fund from the US. So they have a couple of women working in the fund with the entrepreneurs. So it's going I think it's going pretty good in terms of gender balance from maybe 2 or 3.
Do you consider, sorry to interrupt you, but in the interest of time, do you consider this to be part of the next normal?
I'm super excited about the next normal. And I was talking with one of our clients, which is a huge company all over the world, about the new normal. It's before the pandemic just break in the world, we were working with companies trying to figure out reasons for doing things. And now that we have this new normal, I would advise any startup, any company, that don't move forward thinking that the new normal would be a normal. As soon as a solution for the pandemic kicks in, if you go all the way remote, you go with all the team and go remote, and then the pandemic ends because we have a vaccine or something, your company is going to struggle again hard. So yesterday with the client, we were okay, you want to have everyone at home? Be careful, because when things go to the old normal because we have a vaccine, you're going to suffer. So for me, the new normal is figuring out what kind of company are you, and figuring out if you can do remote, if it's the best way, or if it's just a response to the pandemic. And then trying to figure out that the new normal doesn't have to be defined right away. So we can take a couple of months to try to figure out what's going to happen, and not take permanent decisions in terms of releasing your office space and just go remote. And it's okay, what if you need to go back to an office? So and regarding the gender balance, I think one thing that we have been pushing in Mexico is to explain companies that women would create value. And even if you don't believe that you should, but even if you don't believe in gender balance, it's a business decision. Not you don't have to be convinced that it's the right thing. If you just thinking the business is the right business decision to become a more gender balanced company.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
There was an interesting report from McKinsey, I think it was yesterday or the day before, that talked about, the theme was 10 years in 3 months. We have advanced 10 years in so many different ways in the last 3 months. It would be nice if we could advance in this idea of equity, gender and otherwise, in the same ways. It's great thinking or wishing. But last question for you here. And then we can, of course, open it to your general thoughts. And thanks so much for extending the time here for us. What we're seeing is now we that supply chains are shrinking, especially with durable goods and whatnot, manufacturing, et cetera, agriculture. The globalization, however, for ideas and collaboration is increasing. And so conversations like the ones we're having right now today and Startup Grind in general is just really incredible, because the directors are all asking for more of this, more collaboration internationally, regionally. What can the Startup Grind community do for Pablo? I think a lot of us see you as someone who doesn't need any help because you're the rock star. You're the one who invented a lot of what works for the community at large. So maybe we don't think to ask enough or as often, but what can we do for you, Pablo?
Well, I think of two things. The first one is we're trying to moving forward the Latin American ecosystem. And so we are super eager on trying to get companies that are interested in operating in Latin America to reach us and try to tell us how they are imagining the soft landing process. So that would be super helpful for us as a community to try to get more companies on the ground here. And the second thing is that we are creating a help platform. So this help platform relies on people going into the platform, asking for help, and then eventually we're going to build like an algorithm that matches people offering help and asking for help. So I can share the link later, but that would be also super helpful if they can go to the link and just ask for help, and we are going to try to figure it out how to provide that help that can accelerate the process of building the platform.
That sounds like a really great resource. And I know I'm going to hand this over to George to close out. And to that end, I know that we're going to be eager to offer assistance wherever we can. George?
Thank you very much for your presentation, Pablo, once again. This has been very informative. Corey and I here in the Great Lakes, we have developed a little bit of a pattern in the sense that we have expertise in coaching, in supporting, in managing businesses, in turning businesses around. We've covered a whole range of sectors, and our collaboration with Calvin University is giving access to the global campus as we're developing it. If there is anything we can do, please feel free to ask us. We can develop tailor-made systems, programs, ideas. Unfortunately, we're limited by the English language, but soon we will have Hispanic capability as well. So if there's anything we can do in your efforts to build the next generation of entrepreneurs who not only think about ideas, but also think in terms of products, people, and processes, because these three things together make a company, right? If we can contribute, please let us know.
Perfect. Thank you very much. One of the things that we created this organization called For Founders, and the biggest premise behind For Founders is that if you want to win as an entrepreneur, like for a long time we were thinking on how to create like better entrepreneurs, and we took the analogy like if you want to create a better like professional athlete, but the problem is you cannot know what the professional athlete does. So you don't know if he's a gymnast or a football player, so you just know it because it's the same with entrepreneurship. How can you create better entrepreneurs without knowing that you need help in e-commerce or in fintech? Like you just create like better entrepreneurs. So we figured out that the best way to do it is through a sophistication process of the entrepreneur that emulates what our repeated founders learn. So if you're a repeated founder, you learn a lot of things which are not core of your entrepreneur endeavor. So if you do e-commerce 10 times and then you do fintech, you will be a much better entrepreneur in fintech, regardless that you only did e-commerce. So we created something around that, and we are like, we created this workshop, which has been a great journey. We have done it like for over 1,000 people in over 23 countries. So we should talk about it later at some point.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's incredible. You'll definitely be hearing from George and I to follow up with some fun programming that we're putting together, especially after conversations with G and Alex from the Startup Program. We're excited to get things going. So really grateful for your time, Pablo, today. Thank you so much. You've been very generous with us with all the information. I'm really appreciative.
Thank you for your time and have a great day.
All right. All right. Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Hasta la vista. Adiós. Gracias.
Adiós.